Bien, buenos días a todos.
Good morning, all of you. Those of you who don't know me, my name is Ricardo Rodríguez. I'm a Ph.D. I have a Ph.D. at the Zaragoza University, and I research. I have many research lines, amongst others, malware analysis. Today, I will be sharing the following with you. I will be telling you about a specific malware. The name of it is post-RAM scrapping malware. It will steal credit cards from compromised computers. This is quite related to Ruben's presentation. I very much liked it, like that Ruben introduced a number of concepts. So this would be the agenda for my presentation. I will tell you about the problems, what happens when we take our credit cards and we pay at a point of sale, and also I tell you how you can access credit cards information and what this malware is about. I researched, I analyzed these 22 of these malware families. I studied the characteristics of it, the features of it, and I classified them. Then I will move on to a demo. I tell you about the tool, a demo of the tool. I'll show you a real example, then a bit of related work and a few conclusions. I'm sure that you know that there is an increasing number of data exfiltration. So here we may be referring to emails or accounts from different fora, and then we also have data exfiltration with regards to payment methods and means. So this is a photograph or an overview of all these cases that have been on the air for some time now. So I'm sure that you also know that nowadays credit cards are widely used. I don't know whether you know it or not, but some countries are even considering eliminating cash. So there is one country in the European Union, Denmark more specifically, who is trying to eliminate or not to use cash. Singapore is also thinking about that. So we are at a time where it is more and more common and frequent, for instance, to buy bread and to pay with credit cards. So therefore, we're also seeing an increasing number of attacks to financial entities, banks, in an attempt to steal this information, which can be really juicy. And why is that so? Well, in the black market, information of a credit card is an element which is well traded. It is well paid. So these are some data from report, and here we can see the US credit card data. The price of it may range between $1.5 or $5. Fortunately, if we buy 100 cards, give us a discount. If we are talking about a UA credit card data, this information is more expensive, in between $5 and $8. And if we have extra information about the user, for instance, I don't know, social security number, date of birth, that is to say, details that would help us complete the fake identity, the price goes up. So, for instance, if you have information, I don't know, one of those high-range credit cards, such as Platinum or Gold, that credit card data also increases its price. So minimum data needed to complete a payment: cardholder name, expiry date, and the PAN, that is to say the credit card number. Some places on the internet, those three elements are enough to pay for your purchase. Well, you may go and tell me that there is a fourth piece of information to use or to pay with your credit cards. That is the CVV. However, there are other companies, especially US company, where those three pieces of information is enough to go ahead with your credit card payments. So now we should wonder, where are these data coming from? These data, well, these devices are more and more infected. I'm sure that you've seen a computer with a card reader, either embedded on the screen or just as an external device that is used to introduce the car and to enter your PIN number. This is information from a 2014 report, when it says that 36% of publicly known cyber attacks, when they say publicly known, it means that they are known, 36% of them are based on or related to stolen credit cards customer data. Often, most of them take place at retailers or in large restaurants, chains of restaurants. And there is a reason for all that. That being that most of these systems are run on Windows, any version of Windows. What is happening here? We are seeing a change in the type of attacks that are carried out against this system. In the past, we could see terminals and credit card terminals that often were compromised. I have a credit card reader, and then you could modify some elements, insert some elements, so that by the time the user introduces the credit card, you can read that credit card details and transfer that information somewhere else. But let us say that hardware tampering is shifted to doing something which is more common nowadays, that is to say, network sniffing. If you know that credit card information is going through that network, you just go there, you sniff that network, and then you find values associated with the credit card, The best well-known case took place in 2008. The company attacked was a US company, and a group of hackers led by Albert Gonzalez, living in Miami, were found. Well, they could see that the restaurant was using a Wi-Fi network with a web protection. I'm sure that you know the web Wi-Fi protection. That protection is highly vulnerable. So this group of people, the gang, compromised the network from the restaurant. Then they accessed to external servers of the company. So what they found in the external servers of the company was a long list of credit card customer data. What did they do? Once they found those data, they exfiltrate data and then sold it. Therefore, it is estimated that they sold 40 million credit card customer data. So if we were to multiply that by the $1.5 that we mentioned before, you figure how much money they made out of it. Albert Gonzalez was found guilty for these felonies and has been sentenced to 20 years in prison. So we have shifted from doing skimming terminals to now having a specific malware known as post-RAM scrapping, because the main objective is scraping the memory, scraping the memory, which is a terminal or a device that is located in the point of sale. The objective is to find patterns that match credit cards, and once those patterns are found, data is exfiltrated. As I said before, this type of threat, this type of malware, is the greatest threat that these terminals are facing nowadays. We shifted from network sniffing, and now we are facing this specific scraping malware. I want to tell you a bit more about this. In 2013, Target in the US is kind of a Carrefour, large hypermarket. It was compromised by this type of malware, It was belonged to the family of black POS. It is estimated that 40 million records of customers were stolen in 3 weeks. Then in 2014, Home Depot, which is a similar company to Target, was compromised by a variant of prior POS. This time was the framework POS. So they said that the attack lasted for 5 months. We just don't know. As a result of the attack, they stole 56 million records. So this study will tell us how has been the evolution of this type of malware, what is functionality like, how they persist on the equipment, so how do they manage to remain in the machine even if I restart it, how do they process such data, and how the data is exfiltrated. First of all, we should not forget, we should know what happens with our credit card's information when I pay. When I pay, well, I have my credit card, I pay at the point of sale, and then the information, the credit card data, goes to the issuing bank of my card, or the bank to which the POS terminal is connected to. That bank will communicate with the owner of my card, whether it is Amex or Visa or MasterCard, and these companies will check on the last bank. That is to say, my credit cards, my account, my bank account. They will check whether there is enough money on my bank account to go ahead with the payments, especially if we are talking about a debit credit card. And then that confirmation of OK or denied transaction comes through here. So therefore, where do we have the credit card data? Well, the credit card data will be in 4 places, in 4 locations. First of all, it will be in the memory of the equipment. It may be temporarily stored in any device. So, for instance, at motorways, didn't it happen to you, for instance, when you go somewhere, then you are at a motorway, you swipe your credit card, and then you are not charged real time. The payment doesn't take place real time, as Ruben mentioned in the case of aircraft, because there is lots of traffic. They want to speed it up. What they do is to store the information of all the cars that have gone through the toll, and then they just get all those data on a specific day, and they transfer the data to the bank, all those data all together. There are those who say that, for instance, if your credit card is cancelled and is not expired, they say that you could travel on those motorways. So I just want to believe that the information of my credit cards when I go through the toll is stored in an encrypted manner and in a place which is not easy to access, so it's not accessible to attackers. Then my credit card data is also in transit, but fortunately we have a payment standard, payment card industrial, and that standard forces each party to use encrypted information. Therefore, even if my credit card data is in transit, it cannot be compromised. And also, that credit card data will be present also in the actual application, the application running into the point of sale systems. So these are places, or these are different locations where my credit card data could be compromised. Just let me tell you that the malware that we will be seeing today will try to access information right on this point. It will not mind accessing or getting to information in these other three locations. So we have a standard, as I say, PCI, payment cards industry. That standard, well, there are two sub-standards. The PCI DSS. It defines or it tells us how to protect the information in transit, data in transit. Then we also have another version, the PADSS, that tells us the software requirements that your system should fulfill to comply with the prior standards. However, none of these systems takes care about what happens with data in memory. That's one of the main problems of these standards. And the credit card data is in memory. It's in memory, and that data is in clear. So therefore, how to access credit card data? Well, you know that the first way to do it is to have the physical credit cards. So physical data on the card, name, expiration date in American format, US format, and then PAN, primary account number, which is the credit card number, and then the CVV, often ranges from 3 to 4 digits, and it is on the back. It shows on the back of the card. What is it on the back panel of the card? Who has that answer? Well, basically, CVV is what tells that you have physical access to the credit card. If you take the credit card, and unless you look at the back panel, well, this means that you are having physical access to the card, because you can take a look at the back panel. Then, other way to access to credit card data is through the magnetic stripe. Magnetic stripe. There is an interesting video made by Sami. Sami was in CyberCamp last year. They used to put some acid on that stripe, and they could get access to that information, to that data. So I'd like you to know that there are 3 stripes, okay, or this magnetic stripe is divided in 3 bands. Each of these bands come with a different format. So out of those 3 bands, only number 1 and 2 are used. Band number 3 was intended to be used by some banks, but in the end, its use has not been made a standard. Only track 1 and track 2 are used. For information for you to know, for instance, if you have a credit bank account with Ibercaja, in track 3 you will see that you have your bank account number. So track 1 and track 2, these are the ones we are interested in. Come in specific formats. I'm not going to explain each of them. So now just take a look at that. Here we see the credit card, the bank account number, and then in track 2 we have the username, and then we also have the expiry date. So therefore, these are the 3 minimum elements that are needed to make a payment. So when you swipe the stripe, that's where, well, they get, well, this minimum information is already given to the terminal. Another way to access to credit card data, I'm sure that you're aware of these cards. Chip cards, they are also referred to as chip and pin or EMV cards. They are widely spread in Europe, and we use them very, very frequently. When you pay with your credit card, you introduce it in the terminal, then you have to enter your PIN number, and that PIN number authorizes uniquely each of the transactions. It uniquely authorizes each transaction. Some people are doing research on that, and they have proven that this is not true. Well, the latest versions of EMV has improved that vulnerability, but it wasn't like that in the beginning. So basically, EMV is intended to authenticate the card as well as authenticate the holder. But in the case of EMV, no one authenticates the POS terminal. So you may be inserting your card in a terminal in a convenience store. We don't know who is behind that terminal. We trust that there is a sticker with the name of the bank, but there is no terminal authentication. Here I'm saying that EMV standard was created to fight counterfeiting. And now contactless cards, MFC cards. This is another way of getting credit card data. We talked about this type of cards last year, the previous year, 2 years ago. So NFC is just like one more door. So I'm making access to the credit card either through the chip or through the NFC. But actually, the data, I just get it from the chip. The NFC is just one more door to access to credit card data. You know that there is a limit as to the number of, as to the amount that you can pay with an NFC card. And that amount in Spain is up to 20 euros. Well, you already know, everyone knows that NFC cards have quite a lot of problems so far. And now let us move on to talk about malware. Well, these are the typical phases of malware that have been adapted to this type of specific malware. So this malware is, first of all, access to the system. Once it is in the system, it becomes persistent, and it will search for processes. It does that in the first instance. When it detects a system or a process that it's interested in, it will scan the memory. It will gather information. Once it gathers data card data, what does it do? It just exfiltrates those data very quickly. I'll tell you each and every one of the features of this malware. In the case of binaries, the malware executable can be protected or not. If protected, can have several levels of protection. Then in terms of persistence, how it persists based on register, based on the service, or perhaps it is not persistent. If a malware is not persistent, it means that it is the second phase of attack of a third malware. That is to say, someone will have to run it. If it is not persistent, it will not self-run. Or, I don't know, perhaps the user will do that. Regarding functionality, so we can, perhaps it would only steal credit card data, or perhaps it would do something else. Perhaps it would have engaged in any other type of communication. So regarding processes, we can distinguish here whether it does a selective search or not. In the selective one, we could see whether it does blacklisting or whitelisting. So that is to say whether there is only one type of processes that is scanned by this malware. If this were the case, this would be kind of an APT, that is to say, because it knows the process that it wants to scan, that is to say, the systems that wants to attack. In terms of process search, here we could have two things here, either own implementation or system implementation. For an own implementation in Windows, we would need to have a rootkit. But this is, yes, it would be technically feasible if we had that rootkit. So what information does it look for? It looks for either data on track 1, track 2, or both. How do they match that information? We could have regular expression or specific algorithms. How is data exfiltrated? Well, there are several methods for that. Some wait for up until a USB is connected to the machine. Once that happens, it will take all the credit card data and then store it in that USB. So that means that samples assume that there will be someone eventually gaining physical access to that machine. And then also internet-based exfiltration through HTTP queries or through DNS queries. Regarding connection, how data is exfiltrated. Here we could see whether the connection is an ordinary one, whether it logs on ordinarily or through Tor network. Obviously, chasing criminals in Tor, it's more difficult than on surface web. So I downloaded 144 samples from 22 known families. This is a table summarizing each and every one of those families. Each antivirus manufacturer changes slightly the name of it, and this is the discovery date divided by years and quartiles. So, well, I did not analyze each of these 144 samples because I have a life, and I selected a specific sample, the one with the highest virus total ratio. So I analyzed the highest VT ratio, and this is the evolution. In the beginning, we had only one family, registry-based persistence. Then in 2012, 2 families showed up. Then next one registry-based, the other one, another one service prevalence. And you see the numbers here. Well, you could go and say that there are only few families for this type of malware, but I feel that there is an evolution. In the years ahead of us, I believe that these bars will become higher and higher. Well, that will also be good fun, and we will have work to do. So regarding binaries, you should know that most of the binaries have been developed with C++ or DEFI, so only one of families have been developed with .NET. Out of the 22 families, only 5 of them implement any type of security based on PACA. Only 3 of them use any anti-analysis technique. As you can see here, most of them are divided by feature and type of persistence. As you can see, most of them, despite the features, are registry-based. Only few of them do persist, and only few of them are service-based persistence. There is one which is very interesting, the netlove one. It persists in the registry, but it does it in a very special manner. Instead of storing itself in a file, in this sample, or this family rather, is stored in NTFS files. So that's the only way for the evil to hide data, so that those data are not detected in forensics. What information is stolen? What data is stolen? Well, in most of the cases, data on track 1 and 2 are stolen. Most of them, if any, focus on track 2 only, and most of them will do whitelist. What type of processes are those that are excluded? Well, often system processes, Explorer.exe, LSAs, So these system processes, as you know, that will not have credit card data or should not have credit card data, the process is excluded by this malware. Here we have some families, such as these two here, that do whitelisting. They focus on specific processes. And as I say, well, this is problematic. This is a summary of how all this is done. And to such processes, Windows functions are used. And well, this is typical, otherwise we would need a rootkit. So no family has been found using a rootkit. However, we cannot rule that out from happening in the future. Most of the families, when they find the process, we will read the memory of the process from themselves. The process would ask Windows. The malware will ask about the process that it is interested in, then it will take it, and then it will be asking the process for its memory areas. And what memories have you reserved? And then it would answer, well, I have these ones, and then say, would you like to read them? And the malware says no, and then it will read that memory fragment by fragment, piece by piece. However, there are two families, very interesting families, that will inject code. They will inject the memory reading process in the actual process that they want to read. What do they get at? They just avoid jumping an antivirus signature, checking whether there is a process that is accessing the process memory. Accessing the process memory is not very typical. It is not very common. So if the AV is trying to detect that type of behavior, I inject code. Therefore, you make the reading from your own memory space, and this is not detectable by the antivirus, because for the antivirus this is common. So most of them will try to get information from both tracks, or if any, from track 2. And none of them looks for information on track 1 only. So these are some instructions that we find in some regular expressions that we often find in the binaries. So they match the memory with these regular expressions. So these are the first ones that we find for this type of malware. RootedCON. This was first discovered in 2011. Let us take the top one. Here we can see that it is reading the credit card number, then the name and the family name of the person, then the year and the month. Notice from 0 to 9 or 10, 11, and 12. But notice the year. 2007 to 2009. From 2010 to 2015, so that is to say a malware that was discovered in 2011, that's matching with credit cards that expire on 2007. Do you get me? You know what I mean? So, well, if they did not discover that in 4 years, well, they must have made lots of profit out of it.
Most will have non-anonymous connection, and just a couple have this other connection. And then there's this other two that have no kind of exfiltration outside. So those would be the ones that I said before. Keep them on a file, or else send it to a shared unit on a network. Some of them try to send it to a shared unit on a network. And if we think of safe and secure systems, we can think of the POS terminal system, that it's isolated but connected to a system that is not isolated. So I get it out to the system that is not isolated, and from there it goes outside. Most will have HTTP POS connections, and some have a DNS queries as well, or requests. They send these DNS requests to villain or evil systems, and there they code the credit card information that they are exfiltrating. Good. Let me discuss the tool that I've mentioned It's based on the DBI instrumentation principle, so dynamic binary instrumentation. I can run the code when I want and when I say so. So I have my code that will be run, and I say, this is the code I want you to run, and I want you to run it here and there. That's it. This is DBI. We've used Ping, which is Intel developed framework, so you can have this kind of tools develop easily. That's the architecture. And our tool so far is called Ping API hook, and that hooks some system calls, those that we are interested in, such as files, registry, processes, and networks. So I'm monitoring the malware execution or implementation, and what we do is intercepting the calls, and when we intercept them, I write it on a file, all the parameters that it is calling, what the call returns. Let me show it to you on a demo. I've prayed to the gods. So let me show it to you. I have this Debian machine with me, running this server, and I find there is a given website at a given directory. This is a file, PHP, that is there on the screen, and it runs everything and writes it from the past into a given file. And here, 2 consoles or dashboards to control my PHP. This is the Apache log option to check the options, and on top you see the file information where it is writing. That is app.php. Sorry, hub.php. And this is a sample from Lena family. So let me show you the strings inside the binary. These are regular expressions that I explained so far. This sample here is looking for credit cards from 2012 to 2019. Both track 1, this is track 1, and track 2 as well. And I know it because of its format. So this is track 1, equal means it's track 2. So this sample has been modified. As you see, it's been hard-coded and it says where to connect itself. I don't know if you can see it from here, from there, because it's small print. The IP is hard-coded. That's what the sample connects in. And this is what I requested from my system. This is the folder, and this is the hub.php. So I get a post with the information. This web is not working now, but it will be instructed to log to my machine. So I have my own POS server machine with a card reader, and a few people in the morning have been here. So maybe in my memory I've stored this kind of information, meaning that I have my POS system running, and there are some people who've paid using my POS terminal. I don't know, Cesar Romenzana and other people, they've used their card, and this is stored in my memory. So this window stays open and running, and this is all on the process memory, that's Notepad. And this is the other sample that has been modified, a Linux family modified. And when I run, you will see what happens. This is what I've invoked. I will not dwell on that. Press enter, and there are some log files with the traces, and the sample is gone, right? And this is quite typical of malware. Malware, once the machine is infected, it self-deletes. So let's see what's going on here. system, as you see, this Windows system is still running, nothing is going on there. And eventually, if gods are merciful, we'll see that we get the app's information that has kept the card's data on memory. So this is a connection to the Apache server, and up here you see the files information. There it is, thank you. So here's a connection from the Windows machine, an HTTP POS request for a file, and this is the data sent back to me by the back. You see, this is the beginning of an Elena string and all the information data that it's gathered. And you can see, well, that there's been previous tests performed earlier. So HWID, so hardware ID, and a number, right? If we knew about Windows, this is a match. So this number is a match to the number expressing my hard drive volume, so the infected machine. So what the sample is doing is spotting where the data are coming from and the specific machine that is extracting the information. As you can see, there is this little file that has been produced. It is a file, and I guess there's another one. I cannot say this. Oh, here it is. So two files that have information for the execution. This is all the requests to malware. So first, malware tried to create mutex and mutes, and here you see open process calls as well to start processes. That's what it's trying to do here. Some are started, some are not, but in the end you see some readings from the memory, other processes memory. I'm not sure whether it is here. Eventually all the way down it should be. So yes, here you see the request that it's been done. This is the call, the connection. Here it is when there is a connection attempt. This is the IP, and here you see the type of request. This is the send request, you see, and here is what it is sending. So next. Good. This is MD5 of the sample I've analyzed. It's been slightly patched to connect to my server. That was all. Then related work. So many people have looked into different kinds of malware, but no one had looked into this kind of bugs, maybe because it was not mature, this sector. And when it comes to banking information or data, you need to know that some people have developed some tools to sniff into networks to see if your system fulfills the PCISS standard, PCISS, and there is scraping with network packages. And others have looked into security. There are different elements, PayPal and others offer you hardware that you can connect to the audio jack on your cell phone, and the target is to read credit cards. Some people have analyzed what the security is for this kind of systems. So, conclusions. There is a kind of malware that it's quite different, that steals information from credit cards stored in the memory of processes within an operating system, this time Windows. We've seen how they work, first through persistence, then they gather all the processes that are running, and they go into the process memory and find the information that matches a credit card. Haven't mentioned it, but there are a few samples where they implement the LUN algorithm, briefly mentioned by Ruben, which is an algorithm that it's part of the track standard, and it states whether the number of credit card you've read is valid or not. You need to consider that malware reads the whole memory, and it might happen that what is being read doesn't match a credit card. So the format would be a match, but it would not be a credit card. That would be it. And that's a validating algorithm that is used to validate. When the information is found, they just exfiltrate it in whatever way. We've analyzed 22 families, and they were classified based on their behavior or workflow. Take-home messages. Well, luckily there are only a few families trying to use some kind of anti-analysis mechanism. Luckily, all persistent methods used can be easily detected. They are registry-based, and they are quite simple to detect. There's only one that is a bit more complicated. That would be Neatlove using NTFS. So those are alternate flows for information. And most go for process blacklisting. It's only normal because system processes, I'm not interested in looking into them. And most of the time, luckily as well, they will use exfiltration flows that are non-anonymous. So it will be easy to track down where the information is sent, who is receiving it, and so we can crash the villain's system. We've seen some other two weird things, such as DNS exfiltration, or when you plug a USB to your machine, and two more use Tor. Remember that. That's been all for me. If you have questions, I'll be happy to take them. So, good morning. First of all, thank you, Damian, for your presentation. Very interesting. And let me mention, for POS or post-terminal environment, so those companies that set those terminals up, so restaurants and coffee shops, are they aware of it? Or is the solution different? I hope so. These kind of companies, what they try or should try to meet the standard, otherwise you should get lost. But as I said before, when we discuss the standard, what they ensure is that the information in transit is protected. But as far as I know, there is no solution that thinks of memory protection, because this is the local machine, and there is a RAM attack on the machine, that very machine. So I guess that the POS terminal manufacturers should have some RAM cleaning after each transaction. Well, they should do something to make sure that if infected with this kind of malware, the data from the credit card would not be on the memory. So, in plain text, I mean. And that was the question about the different manufacturers. I have not talked to any of them, so I cannot tell you for sure, but I have to guess, based on the market solutions that are out there, and the fact that this is going on, especially in the US, where the credit card is widely used with the magnetic stripe, I would guess that the memory data is not protected, because if it's a chip card, this technique, it would not be feasible, right? Well, see, the chip cards, this would be a different kind of attack. The thing is, if the information out of the chip is stored on the RAM memory, which should not be the case initially, the problem would be the same, but again, it should not be there. So, you would recommend disabling the magnetic stripe, right? I recommend you to be aware of what you do with your credit card. That was it. Where you tap it. what ATMs you use, for sure. Thank you very much.
Buenos días, Ricardo. Muchas gracias.
Hola, Abel. Buenos días.
Good morning. Morning. What's the usual infection vector? Well, as with any kind of malware, if you have a POS terminal, you work at somewhere, and you've got plenty of time, I don't know, a tobacco shop. You've got your terminal, some people come in the shop, some other times you're alone and you've got a computer with an internet connection. What do? Read the newspapers? Or apps, or probably some websites to watch some videos, not so legal videos, movies that are on websites where there's usually third-party exploits to compromise your computer. Basically, what we see is that the attack vector would be the same that we would find with a commodity malware, which is regular malware. It could also be insiders, the typical unhappy employee that plugs in the USB. Yes, the USB exfiltration is more or less clear, but if they attack it all as if it were phishing, or maybe it's a bit much more targeted or focused. No, you could have a much more focused or targeted attacks. Actually, the rule or the standard is to have highly specific attacks, because this kind of websites we mentioned, anyone could log in, and so the percentage of people who find themselves at a POS terminal would be smaller. But we could refer to much more targeted attacks, spear phishing, that takes you to a given website. And then last question, any water holing attack that you've seen? Water holing attack where there might be a regular provider and it is compromised, and so there is a cascade effect? No, I have not seen it. Perfect, thank you very much.
Hola, Ricardo.
Thank you, Ricardo. As always, you're so great at explaining what you need to explain. Easy to understand. I have a question, and you see the ATMs that would speed out money. Does it have to do with this kind of attacks? This is ATM malware, and it's completely different. Okay, good. Maybe a few years from now, next year maybe, I'll discuss that. Nothing to do with Swift attacks either that are so trendy recently. Any more questions? So thank you very much for being in this room on Sunday morning.